In this video, I'm going to explore the idea of poverty in A Christmas Carol. First, I'm going to talk through some key quotations, analyse them, and then we will look for the arguments that we see. At the end of the video, I will show you what an essay plan might look like in an exam situation. First up, let's just remind ourselves that a story in a novel or in any other format is a person or people in a place doing a thing. These are the building blocks, and how these elements are presented is the focus of an essay. In any theme-based literature question, therefore, it's worth considering the characters, the setting and the plot, and thinking about how they relate to the focus of the question. You're essentially asking yourself, where do I see poverty in characters? Where do I see poverty in the setting? What actions concern poverty, making it better or making it worse? When you've considered this, you can take a step back and consider the overall message. This is the process you go through when you read and revise. When we write an essay in an exam, we write it in the opposite order. We come up with a thesis statement. Dickens's overall message is Dickens wants to promote this, Dickens wants to show how. You then go on to prove it by examining the evidence, like the presentation of characters or the actions and how they concern poverty. So let's start by exploring the characters and their settings to see if we can work out what Dickens is driving at with his depiction of poverty. Let's start with the Cratchits. Dickens shows us Bob at work, and we also get to see the whole family at home. I'm going to keep the quotations for this short, so let's look at the fire in Bob Cratchit's office, which is so small it looked like one coal. This particular simile is not powerful. It's deliberately far from it. The idea of a fire with one coal is quite ridiculous. It's not enough to have any real effect. It just looks like a nod towards providing something. And that's one way to look at the symbolism of what the character Scrooge is doing. He's making a token of looking after his employee, telling himself that he's providing warmth enough to do his job, but it is pitiful. We can now build an argument that Dickens is mocking people like Scrooge who don't really fulfill their moral obligations of looking after people who work for them and yet pretend that they do. There's a veneer, a facade of something, but it's not real. That care, like the single coal, doesn't really bear any scrutiny. So the argument becomes, Dickens is showing us that employers cause poverty by not doing enough to look after their employees, while simultaneously pretending to themselves and others that they do enough. That leads to another very short quotation that reveals a lot about Bob Cratchit's life. This is also his setting, his workplace, which is described as a cell. The word cell evokes the image of a prison cell, bringing to life Bob's discomfort, having connotations of being cramped, dim and cheerless, and also being punished. Punished for his own poverty. It also suggests that Dickens is telling us that the working class is imprisoned by employment. There's not a great chance of escape from this life of poverty. There just aren't enough opportunities for the poor. This creates a contrast between Scrooge's wealth and the Cratchit's poverty. Scrooge, of course, has power and control and chooses to be the way he is. Bob Cratchit is simply a prisoner of Scrooge's choices. Dickens is therefore showing that the working class is held prisoner by the profit-driven industrialists and money-making classes, also known as the bourgeoisie. Let's think about the Cratchit family and their poverty. There are lots of choices here, so if you've already learnt a quotation for this, you can use that. I've chosen Brave in Ribbons, which describes Mrs. Cratchit's Christmas dress. It comes from this longer description where she is described as dressed out but poorly in a twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons which are cheap and make a goodly show for sixpence. Let's take a step back and consider Dickens's wider purpose here. The overall impact of the character, of the way they're constructed and presented, is called characterization. If you think about what we know from the characterization and how we feel about it, you'll end up with a pretty detailed analysis. Here we can see that the dress is twice turned, so we know it's an old dress. She's turned it inside out as the outside became worn. The inside then became worn too, so she's turned it back. So we know that the character doesn't have money, They haven't got money for luxuries, including how they dress themselves. The alliteration in brave in ribbons draws the eye and the ear. It's emphatic. Dickens is emphasizing the quality. He wants the reader to know about the character. Here's a quick side note on alliteration. Alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds in nearby words. The words don't have to be next to each other, and the consonant sounds are often at the start of words, but don't need to be. They can also be the stressed syllables in words, hence ribbons in this example. She's brave. That's the word we explore. Brave has connotations of being bold, strong, stoic. She's a tough cookie. And the effect of this word choice is that we feel a certain way about her. We admire her. Perhaps we feel a bit of pity that she can't afford more, but she's got qualities that should be celebrated. If we chuck in that the Cratchits really symbolise the working class, we can join the dots into an argument. Dickens is showing that working people have admirable personal qualities that he respects, and people living in poverty are doing the best they can. Let's consider a further presentation of poverty around Old Joe's shop in Stave 4. I won't go into all the details here because I've broken this down in my video on the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come, so check that out if you want more detail. When introducing the area, Dickens describes how the whole quarter reeked with crime, with filth and misery. Let's deal with reeked first. This conveys a sense of a foul odour, a sense of decay and deterioration, symbolically representing a social deterioration and a moral decay. But what is causing this offensive stench? You've got Dickens's old friend, the ascending tricolon, building a sequence of growing severity. So initially, crime flourishes because of desperation. Then we get filth because the place and its people are not looked after, and this ends in misery, the most personal and affecting of the abstract nouns in this list. Now, the suffering becomes an internalized, emotive quality, showing the reader the suffering of those that live there. Dickens is drawing a link between the poverty that these people endure and the crime that is present in these communities and the misery that this causes. If we stay on setting for just a moment, you might like to work in solitary as an oyster. Now, I've analysed that quotation before, so I'm going to skip lightly over it here, but I will say that it's a good opportunity to look at how Scrooge lives apart from everybody. One possible reason for this depiction, it means the character doesn't have to see the poverty that he creates and indeed lives off. And so this choice to isolate himself from society allows him to be a better miser, a better bad character, if you like. Right, we're getting there. We've looked at a few different presentations of poverty in the novella and worked our way up to those arguments about how and why Dickens presents poverty the way he does. Now let's turn our attention to the attitudes towards poverty, the attitudes that Dickens is promoting, and some of the solutions. First up, here's Scrooge at the start of the novella, having been asked for a Christmas contribution to help the poor. Are there no prisons? Now, I see a lot of students using this quotation, and it's short and easy to learn. It shows the link between poverty and the idea that being poor is somehow a bad thing, something that you need to be punished for. It also links to Dickens' own personal history, as his father was imprisoned for debt, and Dickens himself was sent off to work in a blacking factory away from the family at the tender age of 12. If you want to make your essay shine with this one, you could explore the fact that Dickens makes the character of Scrooge use a rhetorical question in this quotation. The character knows the answer to the question. Are there no prisons? Of course there are. It's there for show, and he enjoys the fact that he's forcing the charity collectors to justify themselves. We learn from this that the character is happy to be cruel, to be verbally cruel, to put people who are frankly doing a kind thing in a really uncomfortable position. Here's another aside. Do you fancy putting a chunk of AO3 in here? Do you like a bit of context? That can be useful and interesting. If you want to, go ahead. Just ask yourself, is this relevant? Am I still answering the question? You can absolutely include the argument presented by people like Thomas Malthus, and I've gone through a few of them in my video on Ghost of Christmas Present. The overall argument, though, begins to look something like this. Dickens is presenting the attitude of the wealthy, of the business owners, of the bourgeoisie as unnecessarily cruel by equating poverty with crime, and these people are actually proud of their own cruelty. Now, Dickens is careful to allow the character of Scrooge a redemption arc on his attitudes, and so Scrooge gets to redeem himself and be generous to the same charity collectors in stave 5. There's a cyclical nature to this. This is described as Scrooge whispered in his ear. The verb whispered shows Dickens won't set an example to rich readers, allowing them to say that they gave more than Scrooge, and the character retains a gentleman's discretion by not revealing the actual sum. He doesn't want public praise. He wants a private redemption. I've got a whole video about that. I'll link it in the description. Instead of that, let's concentrate here on what Scrooge declares about the sum. He says, a great many back payments are included in it. We can see this moment as a symbol of repentance by including back payments in his gift. Scrooge is not just giving a donation, he's trying to make amends for his previous lack of charity. It symbolises his acceptance of guilt and the character's desire to rectify his past mistakes. It suggests he owes a substantial amount to charity due to his previous miserliness. Morally, it indicates his realisation he has a duty to help those less fortunate, people who experience poverty. He is acknowledging that this is a duty he has long ignored, and it's something he is now happy to rectify. Here's the real thing, though. If someone as terrible as Scrooge can be a better person, the rich readers have no excuse for not doing the same. With this, Dickens uses Scrooge's redemption to show that the wealthy can be more generous towards people in poverty, and it's a clear moral good to give money to charity. Now, for that argument to work, the reader needs to go on a journey and see what can be saved by generosity. So let's finish this by exploring the presentation of Tiny Tim. Tiny Tim symbolises the effect of poverty on the innocent. No one chooses to be born into poverty, so Tiny Tim is the victim of the world that exists when he's born. Tiny Tim's death is foretold and foreshadowed in the third stave when Scrooge asks the ghost of Christmas Present, "Tell me if Tiny Tim will live." The ghost replies, "I see a vacant seat." The vacant seat is obviously Tiny Tim, so employing euphemism because it's too harsh to even say out loud that Tiny Tim is dead. Vacant implies an emptiness, and this is symbolic. There's a hole in the hearts of the Cratchits, but what Dickens really wants is that hole to be in the reader's heart. The simplicity of the sentence reinforces the pathos, and the fact that the ghost of Christmas Present says this, not the ghost of future, the ghost of Christmas yet to come, shows Scrooge and the reader that there is a real suffering right now, and that must be addressed. Tiny Tim lives after Scrooge's redemption, after he raises Bob Cratchit's salary, which ensures that the family have the resources needed for Tiny Tim's care. As a result, Tiny Tim's health improves, and he is no longer in danger of dying from his illness. Dickens is showing that the problems with poverty are urgent and need urgent solutions, and that being a better and kinder capitalist will address this issue. Okay, that's the revision bit done. Let's move on to an essay plan. If you were using this for an exam with an extract, like the AQA Literature GCSE, you would want to include something from the extract fairly early on. You do that early so that if you run out of time, you know you've got it covered for both extract and whole text. You can easily tie the extract to one of your points that come from revision, and remember that there is nothing in the mark scheme that says you have to go 50-50 on extract and whole text, so do it in a proportion that works for your knowledge. If you know more about the whole novella, you've got the opportunity to use it. If the question is anything about poverty or anything about what Scrooge learns about poverty, I'm going to be looking to choose my arguments from the points we've revised. I then jot down my thoughts in note form so that I've got a basis to work from. This is what we've gone through. Dickens wants to show or argue employers should look after their employees. The working class is held prisoner by the profit-driven industrialists and money-making classes. Working people have admirable personal qualities that he respects. There's a link between poverty, crime, and misery. The wealthy are unnecessarily cruel. It's a clear moral good to give money to charity. The problems with poverty are urgent and need urgent solutions. Scrooge's redemption shows being a better and kinder capitalist will address issues of poverty. Now, your exam plan is going to depend on the actual wording of the question that you see in front of you. However, you can easily choose your best 3 or 4 from this list. That's probably as much as I would expect to get through in a 50-minute exam. I'd jot down the quotations as I went so as to make sure I remember them, and then I would make a link between at least one of my learnt revised ideas and the extract. As you're writing, don't be afraid to change and adapt the plan as the time goes on in the exam. You may well have an idea of how much you can write already, but you may not get as far as you think, and you might want to drop the later points if you need to. So, when considering the order of ideas, I always say to start with the strongest. Don't build an essay, in an exam at least, into an increasing argument, because there's a danger that you save your best argument to the end, look up, 50 minutes is just about gone, and you haven't actually got enough time to articulate your strongest point. So do be careful about the order of the arguments in any essay. My advice would be very much lead off the strongest foot and get the extract in early. I hope this has been interesting and useful. Secure this learning with a set of Cornell notes or a mind map. I've left all of the quotations and a few links for other things that you might find interesting in the description below. If you're revising, well done, keep it up. Don't forget to subscribe for more. It does help the channel and it keeps you up to date.